Silence isn't weakness. It's the highest form of control, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself through words or noise. When you master silence, you no longer react to the chaos of others. You let them reveal themselves. Most people talk to hide what they fear. They fill space because they cannot handle the weight of emptiness. But the one who embraces silence learns to make that emptiness his weapon. He lets others expose their insecurities, while he studies every tone, every hesitation, every unnecessary word that escapes them. Silence is not just the absence of speech. It's a psychological mirror that makes others confront themselves. In a world addicted to validation, silence is rebellion. It disrupts the rhythm of those who crave attention. It creates discomfort because it cannot be controlled. The silent person becomes the projection screen for everyone's assumptions. They will call you mysterious, cold, arrogant, or deep. But none of these words define you. They define their own discomfort with not knowing who you truly are. And that's where respect begins, in the unknown. People don't respect what they understand completely. They respect what they cannot predict. The silent one becomes unpredictable. They force others to watch their every move, to interpret their smallest gesture, to question their own meaning in your presence. This is power without force, the kind that bends reality through composure. When you speak less, your words carry more gravity. People lean in when you finally decide to talk, because silence has given your voice weight. You no longer compete for space. You own it through restraint. But silence isn't just social power. It's inner power. It's how you train your emotions not to govern you. When you can stay quiet in the face of provocation, you are no longer a slave to impulse. You learn to watch the world like a strategist, not a victim. You understand that silence makes people uncomfortable because it strips away their illusions. They can't manipulate what they can't read. They can't dominate what doesn't respond. Your silence forces them to fill the void with their own insecurities, and that's the secret. They expose themselves while trying to define you. The quiet person becomes a psychological force field. Every time you choose silence instead of reaction, you rewrite the power dynamic. You move from being predictable to being untouchable. The one who reacts loses control. The one who observes gains it. That is the real essence of silence, in not passivity but precision. It's the art of timing, the mastery of restraint. When you pause before speaking, you gain more than time. You gain perspective. You allow emotion to settle, logic to return, clarity to form. You begin to see what others miss in their rush to express. You start reading intent instead of hearing words. And in that stillness, your intuition sharpens. People who live in noise never see reality clearly. They drown in opinions, comparisons, and endless validation loops. But silence filters that out. It turns the mind into a mirror, reflecting truth instead of distortion. That's why silence intimidates. It's not that it hides something dark. It reveals too much. When you stand in silence, you are forcing others to face themselves. You make them aware of the masks they wear. You make them question what they say, why they say it, and who they are without the noise. That's why the silent are respected, not because they demand it, but because people sense that they cannot be easily influenced. The silent man or woman carries the aura of self-sufficiency. They don't need to prove anything, because they already have control over the one thing most people don't: themselves. Silence is the proof of inner discipline. It's the sign that your emotions serve you, not the other way around. It's how you dominate your own mind before trying to dominate any external situation. Because if your inner world is chaotic, your words will expose it. But if your inner world is still, your presence speaks louder than anything you could ever say. Power starts in silence because all great decisions are born there. Every strategy, every insight, every transformation begins in stillness. You can't hear truth in noise. You can't see clearly when your mind is racing, but when you withdraw from reaction, you begin to perceive what's hidden beneath the surface: motives, fears, desires, lies. Silence trains perception. It makes you a student of human behavior. You begin to notice patterns others ignore. You learn how easily people reveal themselves when they're desperate to be heard. You realize how rare it is to meet someone who listens without needing to speak. That's why those who master silence stand out in every room. They radiate calm in chaos. They exude power in restraint. They don't beg for attention. Attention comes to them, because in a world that confuses noise with significance, silence becomes magnetic. It draws curiosity, respect, and sometimes fear. But fear is not the goal. It's simply a byproduct of mystery. The real goal is composure, to be unshaken no matter the situation. Silence isn't always about keeping quiet. It's about knowing when to speak and when to let your energy speak for you. Some battles are won by words. The greatest ones are won by waiting. When you master silence, you don't chase validation. You don't explain yourself. You don't justify your decisions. You let your results do the talking. The more you evolve, the less you need to announce it. Because real transformation doesn't shout, it hums quietly beneath the surface. And that quiet confidence terrifies the insecure. They will test you, provoke you, try to break your stillness, because your silence exposes their noise. Stay calm, let them exhaust themselves. Observe, learn, and act only when necessary. That's what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. Patience disguised as silence. There's no greater display of power than being unmoved in a world built on reaction. The loud fight for relevance. The silent become legendary. Silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care selectively. You choose your moments, your words, your energy. You don't waste them on those who won't understand. Silence is your filter. It keeps your focus sharp and your dignity intact. In silence, you learn the discipline of saying no without words. You learn to distance without conflict, to lead without forcing, to influence without demanding. That's why people respect silence, because it's the mark of self-mastery. You can't fake it for long. It requires a calm mind, a strong ego, and the ability to walk away from anything that disturbs your peace. Silence teaches you what to ignore. It teaches you that reaction is weakness and observation is strength. You stop defending your worth and start embodying it. The ones who speak least often end up remembered most, because their words arrive like precision strikes, not random bullets. They pierce through the noise and stay lodged in memory. Silence gives your presence substance. It turns your absence into something others feel. When you stop explaining yourself, people start to wonder. When you disappear, they start to chase. When you no longer need to prove your value multiplies. The paradox of silence is that the less you say, the more you're heard. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's focus. It's the channel through which real influence flows. And once you understand that, you stop fighting for attention and start commanding it without effort. People will always talk, but only a few can make silence speak. You must decide which one you want to be. Silence refines you. It scrapes away the excess, the ego, the desperation to be seen, until only clarity remains. The one who understands silence no longer seeks to fill moments with meaningless sound. They wait for alignment. They speak when words have purpose, not when emotions demand escape. This shift changes everything. Relationships, perception, respect. When you stop explaining, you become a mystery. When you stop reacting, you become a force. People can't read what doesn't respond, so they begin to project. They wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning, whether they still hold your favor. And that uncertainty creates gravity. The human mind craves certainty. When denied it, it becomes obsessed. Silence makes you unforgettable because it leaves space for imagination. People will fill that silence with their own fears and desires. They'll replay interactions, searching for hidden meanings in what you didn't say. And every time they do, they feed your presence in their mind. That's why silence isn't absence. It's amplification. It multiplies your image, your perceived intelligence, your control. You don't have to be the loudest to lead. You only have to be the most composed. The world is full of noisemakers, but very few understand the rhythm of restraint. Silence is rhythm. It's the pause before the strike, the breath before the word that changes everything. It's the tension between power and release. When you master that rhythm, you move through life like a strategist, not a reactor. You understand that the first to speak is often the weakest, the one trying to fill space, to assert presence. But true presence doesn't require assertion. It simply exists, commanding attention without effort. Silence allows your energy to expand while others deplete theirs. Every unnecessary word drains power. Every impulsive reaction scatters focus. But every moment of silence concentrates strength. You become the eye in the storm, still, watching, calculating. That stillness unsettles people who rely on noise for identity. They'll accuse you of being distant or cold, not realizing you've simply chosen awareness over attachment. Silence gives you perspective. It allows you to see beyond emotion, beyond ego, beyond illusion. And with that vision comes authority. You stop taking things personally. You stop over-explaining. You stop needing to be understood. Because the moment you seek to explain yourself, you've already placed your power in someone else's hands. The silent one keeps it close. They understand that understanding isn't owed, it's earned, and not everyone deserves access to your truth. Silence protects what words would expose. It guards your intentions until the time is right. That's why kings, generals, philosophers, the truly powerful, always speak less than they know. They understand that mystery is a currency of influence. The unknown inspires caution, curiosity, even fear. When people can't predict you, they have to respect you. Because unpredictability is control. It forces others to play defense while you stay centered. That's the essence of psychological dominance. Not aggression, but presence. The kind that shifts a room without uttering a sound. People start mirroring your energy, lowering their voice, choosing their words carefully. Your silence sets the tone. It shapes the emotional temperature of every interaction. You are no longer reacting to the environment. You are defining it. This is the transformation silence brings, from participant to observer, from observer to master. But silence also reveals your inner world. It's in silence that you meet yourself, stripped of noise, masks, and roles. Most people fear that confrontation. They fill their days with distractions to avoid it. But when you sit in true silence, you begin to hear your own mind clearly. You notice how much of your life has been driven by reaction, how many decisions were made out of fear or validation. You start to separate your true voice from the voices of others. That's when silence becomes not just a tool, but a sanctuary. You begin to crave it. You start seeking moments of solitude, not to escape the world, but to realign with your strength. Silence becomes your reset, your recalibration, your private space of power. You no longer depend on the world's noise to feel alive. You start creating from within. That's what makes the silent person dangerous in the best sense. They're self-sustaining. Their motivation doesn't come from approval, it comes from understanding. Their focus doesn't scatter, it sharpens. Their emotions don't control them, they channel them. Silence transforms sensitivity into awareness, emotion into insight, pain into clarity. It's not about suppressing feelings, it's about mastering their expression. The one who can feel deeply and still remain silent holds immense psychological strength. Because silence doesn't mean numbness, it means control. It's choosing when to express, how to express, and to whom. And that choice defines maturity. The immature seek release, the wise seek precision. You don't throw words like stones, you place them like chess pieces. You let silence carry the tension until the right move appears. That's why people who master silence rarely regret what they say, because they only speak when it adds value. Silence trains you to see the cost of every word. It shows you how energy leaks through unnecessary explanations, arguments, confessions. You learn to preserve that energy. You learn that silence builds trust in yourself, because when you can resist the urge to react, you prove to yourself that you are not your impulses. You are your awareness. That's the foundation of all inner power. Awareness. The ability to watch emotion without becoming it. To experience without identifying. To observe without collapsing. Silence is the birthplace of that awareness. It's not emptiness, it's expansion. It's where the mind stops and the soul begins to speak. And the more you listen, the more you realize that everything powerful moves in silence, growth, healing, strength. The seed grows underground. The storm gathers before it's seen. The most transformative forces are silent because they don't need acknowledgement. They simply are. When you embody that principle, you stop seeking attention and start radiating presence. People will sense it without knowing why, They'll respect you without understanding it. Because power doesn't need to explain itself. It just exists, quietly, undeniably. And in that silence you find the truest form of respect, not the kind that's demanded, but the kind that's earned through the energy you carry. Every moment of restraint deepens that respect. Every time you hold your tongue, you reinforce your dominance over self. Every pause becomes a declaration of mastery. Silence teaches that what you withhold is often more powerful than what you express, because what's rare is valuable, and silence, in a world of noise, is the rarest form of strength. Silence is the unseen language of those who command themselves first and the world later. It's not about muting your voice. It's about elevating its frequency until it carries meaning without volume. When you operate in silence, you begin to notice something profound. People reveal themselves faster when you stop revealing yourself. Every time you withhold, others overextend. They fill the space with truths they didn't plan to share. They try to decode you, to break your stillness, to extract a reaction, and in doing so, they expose their own patterns. Silence turns social interaction into a mirror. It's not manipulation, it's awareness. You stop playing the game emotionally and start observing it strategically. This is the point where you stop needing to win and start learning to understand. Because power isn't about domination, it's about direction. Silence directs energy where it needs to go instead of letting it scatter into chaos. It creates an invisible gravitational field around you. People begin to feel that field. They adjust to your rhythm without realizing it. They speak softer. They move slower. They weigh their words. That's what real influence is, unspoken authority. It's what every leader, artist, philosopher, and strategist has in common, the ability to hold silence without breaking. Because when you break silence too soon, you lose leverage. But when you master it, you dictate the tempo of every interaction. You make people wait, and in that waiting, they grow attentive. You create tension, not destructive tension, but psychological engagement. That's the difference between being heard and being followed. Words make people listen. Silence makes them remember. Think of every moment you've ever respected someone deeply. It wasn't because they spoke the most, but because their presence made you feel something you couldn't define. That's the effect of controlled silence. It's not emptiness, it's pressure. It's not passivity, it's potential. The mind interprets silence as importance. When you speak less, people assume your words have value. When you act without explaining, people assume your actions have intent. This is why silence paired with discipline becomes an aura. It's what turns ordinary people into enigmas. You no longer reveal your thoughts prematurely. You allow time to work for you. You understand that mystery isn't built by pretending, it's built by withholding. You can't fake depth, you can only create the conditions for others to perceive it. Silence is that condition. It gives depth to your image, gravity to your decisions, and control to your emotions. And the longer you sustain it, the more you begin to reshape how others respond to you. They start second-guessing their own behavior. They wonder what you think, what you want, how you feel, and that curiosity is power. But silence isn't only external. Its greatest power is internal. It's what allows you to separate thought from noise. When you practice silence, you begin to hear your true instincts, the raw intuition that modern life buries beneath distraction. You begin to notice how much of what you once said was unnecessary, how often you spoke out of habit, not purpose, how often you explained yourself to people who were never listening to understand. Silence breaks that cycle. It replaces validation with clarity. It detaches you from the need to be perceived correctly, and that detachment becomes freedom, because once you stop trying to manage perceptions, you start controlling reality. You act without overthinking, you speak only when it aligns with purpose, and you stop wasting energy defending your peace. Silence teaches emotional economy, how to invest your energy where it multiplies and withdraw it where it depreciates. Most people exhaust themselves explaining what silence would have expressed more powerfully. You learn that silence cannot be misquoted, misunderstood, or manipulated. It protects your truth by keeping it sacred. It builds patience, the highest form of intelligence. Patience is silence stretched through time, the ability to hold space without anxiety. When you cultivate it, you begin to master timing. You know when to step forward and when to vanish. You learn that every word spoken too early weakens its impact. Power requires timing, and timing is born in silence. Every great strategy was once a quiet observation. Every decisive move came from waiting for noise to settle. Those who rush to act reveal their intentions. Those who wait move invisibly. Silence hides your preparation and magnifies your outcome. It's the difference between announcing and arriving. The world is full of announcers. The silent arrive with impact. They don't tell you what they'll do, they do it. And the silence that follows their action speaks louder than any declaration. This is what separates leaders from talkers, doers from dreamers. The silent build in the shadows, while the noisy crumble under their own volume. And when the time comes to reveal, the effect feels inevitable. People call it luck, fate, or genius, but it was silence all along. The discipline to stay unseen while preparing, the strength to let misunderstanding exist without correction, the courage to be underestimated. That's real silence, not passive, but deliberate, not absence, but focus. You stop fearing being misunderstood because you understand yourself. You stop fearing distance because you've made peace with solitude. You stop fearing judgment because you no longer need approval. This is where silence turns into serenity, when it's no longer a tool, but a way of being. You begin to feel its weight inside you. You notice how your presence changes rooms. People sense something they can't name. They listen differently, even when you're not speaking. That's the moment silence transcends strategy and becomes power. The kind that doesn't need validation, doesn't need defense, and doesn't need explanation. You've become the person others react to, the one who sets emotional rhythm, the one whose absence carries as much weight as their presence. Silence at its core is alignment between emotion, thought, and intention. When these three move as one, words become optional. Power becomes natural. You don't speak to control, you speak to clarify. You don't act to impress, you act to express. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer explain, you exist. Silence doesn't make you invisible, it makes you inevitable. Silence is a discipline of the mind, a sculptor of character, a test that only those who face themselves can pass. It forces you to confront what most people spend their lives avoiding, their inner noise. When the world goes quiet around you, you start hearing the echoes of every insecurity, every regret, every hidden fear that words used to bury. That's why silence feels uncomfortable to the weak. They can't stand it because it demands truth. But for those who endure it, silence becomes liberation. It strips you of false identities until only your essence remains. It teaches you what actually matters and what's just distraction disguised as importance. In silence, you learn the hierarchy of your own thoughts. You begin to see which ones are driven by ego and which come from wisdom. The longer you stay quiet, the sharper your discernment becomes. You stop confusing reaction with response, emotion with intuition, movement with progress. You start valuing stillness not as idleness, but as power in reserve. Because silence is not withdrawal from life, it's observation of it. And from observation comes understanding. You begin to see patterns repeating around you, the same emotional scripts, the same manipulations, the same illusions people chase. While others are tangled in noise, you're decoding reality. You start to realize that most conflicts exist because people can't handle silence. They demand closure, answers, validation, explanations. And when they don't get them, they create stories. Let them. Those stories say more about them than about you. Your silence denies them control. It drives them mad precisely because it reveals their dependency on reaction. When you stop feeding that dependency, you break their psychological hold. You become unpredictable, and unpredictability is the birthplace of power. People respect what they can't define and fear what they can't control. That's why silence commands both respect and caution. It shifts attention from words to energy. Your mere presence becomes communication. Every glance, every pause, every breath carries intent. Silence sharpens subtlety. You learn to influence without visible effort. You stop pushing and start pulling. The silent one doesn't chase outcomes, they shape environments. They understand that influence is never in the noise, it's in the timing, the restraint, the invisible currents beneath every interaction. Silence lets you feel those currents. It attunes you to emotional temperature. You can sense tension before it erupts, deceit before it's spoken, truth before it's admitted. This is why those who practice silence move with precision. They rarely make dramatic mistakes because they never act from impulse. They wait until truth reveals itself naturally. And truth always does because silence exposes it. You learn that you don't have to force clarity, you just have to create the space for it to surface. That's what silence does. It creates space. In that space, everything false collapses. Lies lose oxygen. Pretenders reveal themselves. The unnecessary fades. What remains is pure, clean, essential, undeniable. And that clarity is terrifying to people who live through performance. They'll call your silence arrogance because they can't label calm as strength. They'll project their insecurity onto your stillness because they can't stand what it reflects back. But your job isn't to be understood. It's to remain aligned. Silence keeps you aligned with truth, not perception. It frees you from the emotional economy that drains the majority. While others react, you reserve energy. While others talk themselves into exhaustion, you restore. That's why silence is rejuvenation for the mind. It heals the fatigue of overexposure. It detoxifies the psyche from the addiction to attention. When you step into silence, you step outside the marketplace of opinions. You stop being a performer and become an observer of the performance. You start noticing how much of human interaction is theater, rehearsed emotions, curated words, strategic vulnerability, and you begin to appreciate authenticity because it becomes rare. Silence makes you real in a world of performance. It makes your presence a relief for those who are tired of pretending. You become the quiet center others gravitate toward, even if they don't understand why. That's the paradox. Silence attracts even those who fear it, because deep down, everyone craves peace. They just don't know how to create it. Your silence becomes a reminder of what they've lost: self-possession, calm, clarity, and so your presence begins to heal without effort. That's the spiritual dimension of silence, its ability to influence beyond intention. It purifies spaces simply through being. But silence is also a test of ego. It challenges your need to be right, to be heard, to be acknowledged. It forces you to measure your worth not by reactions but by self-awareness. You realize that true confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It radiates quietly. The moment you no longer feel the need to prove your intelligence, people begin to recognize it. The moment you stop chasing validation, people begin to seek yours. Because silence doesn't just create mystery, it creates authority. It signals that you're not governed by the external world. You operate from within, and that's the ultimate respect, self-respect. Without it, no external admiration has value. With it, even solitude feels like power. That's why silence isn't loneliness, it's sovereignty. It's the moment you realize you can be alone and still feel whole. When you reach that point, every interaction becomes a choice, not a necessity. You don't need people to complete you, you choose them to complement you. You no longer fear losing anyone because you've already found yourself. And from that place, your silence evolves into presence, quiet, unshakable, magnetic. You don't chase influence, it gravitates toward you. Because silence, when mastered, doesn't isolate. It amplifies. It turns you into the calm voice in a chaotic world, the steady rhythm in a room full of noise. People start trusting you without knowing why. They sense that your words, when they come, are the result of thought, not impulse, and that trust, born from silence, is the foundation of lasting respect. Silence is the final stage of mastery, the point where power no longer needs to announce itself. It is the invisible armor that shields you from chaos, the proof that your emotions no longer dictate your direction. When you reach this level, your stillness becomes presence, your calm becomes command. You begin to notice how the loudest ones crave validation, while the silent ones command attention naturally. People wait for your reactions, your opinions, your approval, because they've learned that when you speak, it matters. You've conditioned them to respect your pauses more than others' proclamations. That's the paradox of silence. It speaks louder because it's rare. Every word you withhold becomes a statement. Every pause becomes pressure. The power lies not in how much you say, but in what you choose not to say. Because what you withhold defines you more than what you express. When you can stay quiet while misunderstood, you have matured beyond most. When you can remain calm while provoked, you have entered the realm of control. When you can observe rather than react, you have stepped into leadership, not the kind given by title or position, but the kind that emanates from psychological balance. Silence isn't weakness, it's restraint refined into wisdom. It is knowing that not every truth deserves to be spoken, not every opinion needs to be shared, not every challenge requires a response. Silence teaches you that emotional control is the highest currency in human interaction. When you hold it, others sense it instinctively. They feel the difference between someone who speaks to fill space and someone who speaks from understanding. Silence sharpens intuition. It teaches you to read what isn't said, the tone beneath the words, the energy behind the eyes, the patterns that repeat in behavior. You begin to see that most communication happens in silence anyway, in glances, pauses, and subtle shifts in energy. You start speaking that language fluently, and suddenly you're no longer participating in chaos. You're orchestrating it. People start following your pace, not because you ask them to, but because your composure sets a standard. Silence sets standards. It's how you communicate that you are not to be rushed, not to be provoked, not to be reduced. It's the expression of self-control disguised as stillness, and in a world addicted to reaction, stillness is a superpower. It makes people recalibrate in your presence. They slow down, they measure their tone, they reflect. That's the kind of power that can't be taught. It must be built through solitude, self-discipline, and observation. Silence is the gym of the mind. Every moment you resist the urge to react, you strengthen your inner foundation. You train yourself to stay composed in the face of emotion, to pause when others panic, to breathe when others break. And when you master that rhythm, life begins to unfold differently. You stop being a character in other people's stories and become the author of your own. You see how silence separates the thinkers from the talkers, the grounded from the desperate, the calm from the chaotic. You realize that noise is a form of surrender. Every unnecessary word, every impulsive reaction, every need to explain is an admission of loss of control. Silence, however, is victory without battle. It's how the wise win without fighting, influence without arguing, lead without shouting. Silence is invisible dominance. People won't always understand it, but they'll always feel it. It's the gravity that pulls attention without asking for it. It's the dignity that cannot be faked. When you master it, you stop performing and start existing with purpose. You move with quiet certainty, speak with calm conviction, and carry an aura of inevitability. Because silence, when integrated, becomes destiny. It's how the mind transcends noise and becomes one with clarity. You learn to navigate life not by force but by flow, not by control but by presence. Every decision becomes precise, every word deliberate, every action meaningful. That's the art of silence, refinement without rigidity, power without pride. It's how you rise above pettiness and step into real influence, the kind that doesn't fade with attention spans. You become timeless because silence never goes out of style. It's the mark of discipline, intelligence, and restraint in every era. It's what separates the temporary from the eternal. When others seek to be heard, you seek to understand. When they rush to prove, you remain grounded in proof that requires no defense, because silence is the only proof that doesn't need witnesses. It's the self-evidence of control, and in that control lies peace, not the absence of challenge, but the ability to remain still in the storm. When people see that, they respect it, even if they don't comprehend it. They may not articulate it, but they feel it. That aura of someone who has mastered the art of emotional silence. You are no longer defined by reaction, but by restraint. No longer driven by noise, but by necessity. Every step, every glance, every pause becomes intentional. And intention, expressed through silence, becomes pure power. Because power, in its purest form, doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't demand attention. It earns it. It doesn't need validation, it defines it. And when you reach that point, when your silence speaks louder than anyone's voice, you've understood the code. Silence isn't the absence of power, it's the proof of it. Subscribe, because real power doesn't shout, it whispers.